On June 5th, 2011, 50-year-old David Prideaux walked into Victoria's high country to go deer hunting. David was the general manager of Barwon Prison, a senior position he had reached after years working within Victoria's correction system. He began working as a locksmith at the age of 25, and his brother Peter, who was a prison warden, helped him obtain a job maintaining correctional locks. To those close to him, David was known as Hubble. He was one of 9 siblings and was described as methodical, capable, and safety conscious. He was also an experienced outdoorsman, a detail that would later become significant when investigators examined the circumstances of his disappearance. David was considered to be in good health, although he took medication for high blood pressure. In this documentary, we will look at what happened to David Prideaux that fateful day in the Victorian High Country. June 4th, 2011, David and his brother-in-law Rob Dale left Melbourne for a deer hunting trip in Victoria's high country. On the way, they stopped at a bakery in Mansfield and bought pies before continuing towards the mountains. David had packed the Land Cruiser with camping equipment, bottles of Shiraz, and supplies for an antipasto dinner. They continued into the high country and arrived at Tomahawk Hut, near Mount Sterling, at about 1:30 that afternoon. They planned to get up at 6 o'clock the following morning for the hunt and went to bed at about 10:30 p.m. On Sunday morning, June 5th, David and Rob got up at about 6 a.m. and prepared for the day's hunt. David was wearing new camouflage thermals, and Rob Dale later remembered him saying, "I'm warm as toast. I might even get hot." The men carried rifles, backpacks, food, water, ammunition, and UHF radios. David also had a GPS with him. They left the hut at about 7:45 a.m. and set out to hunt. David was not familiar with this particular part of the Victorian high country. Rob Dale had been in the area about 15 years earlier, giving him some previous familiarity with the country. Although he carried a GPS, the coronial evidence established that he did not have a map of the area with him. Those details later became important when the coroner considered how easily he could have become lost or disoriented. At a fork in the track, David and Rob separated to continue hunting independently. The fork where David was last seen alive. Rob scaled the hill on the right, David took the road to the left. From that point on, there were no confirmed sightings of David. At about 11:30 a.m, Rob Dale returned to Tomahawk Hut while David remained out hunting. Dale intended to cut firewood, but the chainsaw was locked inside the Land Cruiser and David had the keys. By about 4:30 p.m, David had still not returned, so Dale tried to contact him over the UHF radio, making repeated calls across multiple channels, but heard only static. He also checked his mobile phone and found there was no reception at the hut. As darkness approached at around 6 p.m, Dale left the hut and began searching the nearby road, calling out for David and flashing a torch into the surrounding bushland. That night he travelled approximately 3 kilometres back up the track before finding a single bar of mobile reception. From there, he tried calling David's mobile phone, but the call went to voicemail. Dale left a message saying he was fucking worried and gave David a 2-minute warning before he contacted emergency services. David never received the calls because his mobile phone had been left locked inside his Land Cruiser at the campsite. At about 8:45 p.m, Dale used the available reception to contact emergency services and report David missing. Mansfield police arrived at Tomahawk Hut at about 9:45 p.m. with the weather conditions described as atrocious. During the night, strong winds and heavy rain moved through the area, while snow fell at unusually low elevations. At first light on Monday, June 6th, the search for David began. Victoria Police Search and Rescue deployed ground teams into the surrounding country, while the Police Air Wing searched the area from above. The State Emergency Service and Bush Search and Rescue Victoria were also brought in to assist with the search. Rob Dale asked police to examine his rifle to establish that he had not fired it that day, police declined, telling Dale they believed his account. Instead, they instructed him to fire the rifle into the night in the hope that David might hear the shot and respond. On the first day of the search, police broke into David's Land Cruiser while looking for clues. The vehicle was then used to transport searchers up and down the mountain throughout the operation. It was never forensically tested for blood, a decision that later became a point of criticism and contributed to questions about whether important evidence may have been lost. The search continued for 8 days across steep, heavily vegetated alpine terrain, making the work particularly difficult for ground teams. By Wednesday morning, approximately 15 centimetres of snow had fallen, followed by further snow and hail during the day. When conditions improved on Friday, June 10th, Bush Search and Rescue Victoria volunteers conducted systematic line searches through sections of the search area. During those searches, investigators recovered a $59.95 price tag believed to have come from a camping store, along with a single boot mark matching the size and make of David's boots. Neither find established a direction of travel or provided a confirmed trail to David. The initial BSAR operation lasted 5 days, while police and other emergency services continued searching until the broader 8-day operation was suspended. Further search operations were conducted between September and November 2011 as the snow receded, although dense scrub continued to make parts of the area difficult to access. Between October 17th and 19th, Victoria Police returned to the area with specialist dog teams from Corrections Victoria and the Police Dog Squad. 4 Bush Search and Rescue Victoria members were specifically requested to act as navigators for the operation. The search focused on higher, flatter ground north of Tomahawk Hut, areas considered more likely to have been used by deer hunters. The teams worked systematically through terrain that had proved difficult to search during the initial operation. In 2013, a bushfire cleared sections of the dense undergrowth, opening up parts of the landscape that had previously been obscured. Investigators returned to the newly accessible areas, but the additional search produced no conclusive evidence about what had happened to David. By 2012, an alleged sighting of David at an ATM in Broome, Western Australia, had been investigated but was ultimately considered not credible by the coroner. Other reported sightings also failed to establish that David had survived his disappearance. The investigation was subsequently reviewed by the Homicide Squad in Melbourne. Police examined the circumstances surrounding David's disappearance and found no evidence that he had been murdered or that he had deliberately manufactured his disappearance. There had also been speculation that David's disappearance was connected to his position at Barwon Prison and the murder of Carl Williams. His brothers Paul and Stephen believed there could have been a connection, including claims that David possessed sensitive information about the Williams case. David's wife Joanne and police rejected those claims, and no evidence was found to substantiate them. On July 15, 2014, Deputy State Coroner Ian West delivered his findings into the disappearance of David Prideaux. The coroner determined that David was deceased and had most likely died on or about June 5, 2011. The cause of death could not be established, but the evidence was considered consistent with either a serious accident in the national park or a medical event. The coroner ruled out foul play and rejected the suggestion that David had deliberately manufactured his disappearance. David's remains were never recovered. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, please consider subscribing to Oculus Lupi. Your support helps us continue producing carefully researched documentaries. If you'd like to share your thoughts on this case, or have additional information from reliable sources, please leave a respectful comment below.